We saw bodies, we saw burnt vehicles, we saw the vehicles of the terrorists on the sides of the roads. You're driving around all of this stuff, trying not to, hit any of the bodies with your Hummer and that kind of thing. So you're exposed to all of this carnage, but at the same time, what it does is your brain kind of goes on, it goes on a survival mode, I think.
Hello, everyone. This is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Doron Keidar. That is not quite correct, but it's close, I think. But Doron, for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
I'm born and raised in Israel. You hear from my American accent, it sounds as if I made Aliyah or came from America, but that's actually my family background are American. But I was born and raised in Israel. And then at some point, I ended up going to studies, went to college in the U.S., and that's actually where I brushed up on my English skills, or American skills, I tell people, because the British wouldn't call what I speak English. and so, and so when I came back to Israel after my studies, I started my military service. I ended up in a combat unit called Givati. In 2003, I started my military service fighting in the Gaza Strip area. So we were the southern division, and our main focus was the Gaza Strip, and that was before the pullout in 2005. So as far as where I operated and what I experienced as a young soldier, that was my battlefield, I guess you could say. And then in 2006, I started my military reserve duty in northern Israel. So I ended up having experience also operating and defending the northern border, fighting in the Second Lebanon War, and essentially every war up until the present war that we're now fighting in Gaza is what I've had experience in and operating in. So that's, I guess, a little bit about myself. And then also another area that I'm involved in as far as occupationally is I've done executive protection for many years. Since about end of 2006, I started working for the Israeli government. They send out almost like an advertisement for people who've been in combat and that fit their profile. And then you start the whole process of getting accepted to wherever area. And I essentially started my way doing security for the Ministry of Education facilities in Jerusalem. And that's essentially where I got my start. And then today I do executive protection for a private company that's a non-governmental company, but we work with the government. We work with politicians that come from abroad, mainly the U.S., and that's a little bit of what I do. In addition to that, I also do Israel Advocacy, and I lead an organization called Cry for Zion, where we petition Christians and educate Christians about the importance of the Temple Mount. And we're also just wrapping up a film project that we started a few years ago called I Am Israel, the Mountain of the King. And that is a epic Hollywood quality movie that is probably the first movie that I'm aware of that actually highlights the Temple Mount, highlights and showcases Israel in a very beautiful cinematic way, equivalent to the IMAX film that was done about Jerusalem a few years ago. Essentially, that's what we were shooting for as far as the quality, production, etc. And so that will be released in May of this year for Jerusalem Day. So that's a little bit of what I've been doing in the past few years.
Too much. Plenty of spare time then.
Yeah, exactly.
So if people hear this and they say, we like Doran, we want to find out more about him or get more updates on the film or the various advocacy things that you do, where can they do that?
They just go to doronkeidar.com. I actually opened that website. It's a new website that's my private website, if you like, that essentially showcases all the podcasts that I've done. It showcases the film that we're working on. Just anything that's currently happening, we try to keep that posted there. And it also connects you to all of my social media, because I've noticed that I've been shadow banned by social media. So you could actually Google my name, correct lettering, everything, and it still won't even give you a hit for me. Not even a suggestion out of the list of suggestions. So I noticed that actually by somebody that literally was standing next to me and said, "Oh, how do I follow you on Instagram?" And he's typing out my name, and I said, well, he's like, "Let me see." I was like, "Oh, no, you spelled it correctly." And so I said, "Wait, what's your name?" And so I had to follow him, and then he could connect with me. So basically, to bypass all that, we started the website. It also has the podcast on there. That's another thing that I've started since the war, actually, and in response to the current October 7th war. I started a podcast where essentially I noticed that there's a media war against Israel, not just a physical war with terrorists. And so the podcast was in response to that, and also to commemorate the fallen soldiers and good friends of mine that have fallen in this current war and in previous wars.
I don't want to let that slip by when you said good friends of yours. That is, it is tragic, but it's probably the story of almost every IDF soldier to some degree or another.
Yeah. I'd say most of us who are in combat, it's the smallest percentage of the military. Let's say it's about 10%, I would guess, that are actual combat. And then in the special forces community, you're about the 1% of that 10%. So anyone who's in that 1% is going to know more people that died in this current conflict, because we had the highest number of special forces operators of the most elite units that fell in one day on October 7th in response to the terrorists. And then, of course, you have the bigger divisions with like I said, the 10% that also know people, but it's much, much bigger divisions. So you don't necessarily maybe know someone personally, but you definitely have a relative or someone, a friend of a friend. So, yeah, it's definitely the first time, I think, in the over 20 years that I've been fighting that I guess you could say that the casualty rate is so close and personal, so to speak. It used to be, oh, I know a friend or a brother of or someone of somebody. But here it's like, oh, yeah, you definitely know someone that fell in combat to defend the Jewish state against these monsters that came at us from Gaza.
I saw one clip of you on, it might have been your podcast, I'm not too sure. But you were sharing a story about how you were about to go into Gaza, I think, and people were saying to you, hey, look at this clip, look at what they've been doing. And you said, no, I can't look at that. When I go in, I have to be professional. I have to, have my head screwed on straight, kind of thing. Can you talk a bit about that? Why you said, no, I don't want to see this footage? Obviously, you were going to go on to see things they had done anyway, but talk a bit about that. Why did you not want to see that before you went in there? And is that something that you heard from other people? And that, we hear about the IDF being sort of the most moral army, and but within that, there are these struggles, right? A bit like what you just said. I need to act professional. Or going, is this a struggle that you see a lot going on with the other IDF soldiers?
Yeah, put it like this. So you're exposed to the most violent attack against the Jewish state since the Holocaust, right? We've had wars. We've had many wars, unfortunately. But for the first time, really have those wars entered into our towns, into our villages, into our communities. I'd say other than, let's say, the 48 war, right? Which was different. And so what happened is we rushed to our communities, these civilian communities, these towns, to go defend them, to save them from these terrorists that had just gone on a killing spree. And of course, we got to see the carnage. We saw bodies, we saw burnt vehicles, we saw the vehicles of the terrorists on the sides of the roads. You're driving around all of this stuff, trying not to, hit any of the bodies with your Hummer and that kind of thing. So you're exposed to all of this carnage, but at the same time, what it does is your brain kind of goes on, it goes on a survival mode, I think. It protects you from the images you saw. And it wasn't until afterwards when we, at some point, were having a downtime and we're starting to process all of these images and also all of the footage that the terrorists were uploading to social media, that you started to see the brutality. You saw how they were torturing the hostages. And this one particular footage that I was mentioning that I had to kind of be like, okay, enough is enough, was this young boy in Gaza surrounded by a bunch of little children, in Gaza, that were just mercilessly beating him and humiliating him. And the kid is crying. The kid is broken. The kid is just trying to plead for mercy. And as I was watching just a little bit of that, I told my good friend who was showing me this, that, hey, bro, I can't watch that. I can't, I've had enough. Okay. If I keep watching more of this stuff, because this is stuff you can't process out. It's, I'm saying, it's different when you're at a pause. You're not operating. You're not, your mind doesn't have something else to activate on. You're actually focused on that footage, right? So it's kind of hard to explain, but it's different when you're in the thick of it versus when you're in a pause and you're actually just, the footage, you're just watching it, right? It's right there. There's nothing else kind of distracting you. And so, yeah, and I'd say it wasn't just myself. There were some other guys in my unit who had chosen, I know my commander being one of them, for example, who had chosen to guard ourselves from the social media footage of the horrors of what these terrorists were doing. So yeah, we chose not to view it. We chose to protect ourselves, because in essence, what you're trying to do is you're trying to protect your emotions and you're trying to protect your psyche so that you don't lose it. And we were already way past pure rage, right? It's something that's very hard to explain, but the rage that I felt towards the enemy, the rage towards these demons that had done these atrocities to our people, it was in your veins, right? You already had that rage there. I didn't need something else to add to the rage, because at some point I'm going to have to come face to face with these terrorists, and I'm going to have to be able to act professionally and not have my emotions involved, not have those images flipping through my mind of what they did. And I mean, just one example, we had a terrorist that we were doing guard duty for, right? That we were watching over a group of these terrorists. And I'll never forget that we had the information that one of them had confessed to raping a little girl, because he had a lock of hair on his person when the field intelligence guys were questioning him. And they could tell there was something shady about this guy. And eventually he confessed and said, oh, yes, I kept as a memento from the girl that I had raped, a young Jewish girl, one of the hostages. And I'm telling you, when I heard that, and I'm looking at this pathetic little man, right? All I wanted to do was to keep my distance from this person, because in your mind, what's going through your mind in that moment is every scenario of violence that you want to actuate on this person, because what they just did was unacceptable. This girl did nothing to him, yet he had no problem doing this to her because he's a pathetic little loser, right? He's not a warrior. He's not a fighter. He's not any of those things. Like a lot of them like to talk up, and you see on the propaganda footage, he was a skinny, scrawny little nobody. And he took advantage of the situation of all these terrorists entering Israel. And again, I'm not sure if it was an actual hostage or just one of the girls in the communities, by the way. So just to be clear on that. But in any which case, it doesn't matter to me. He had done this to a young Jewish girl, and it was just, So yeah, you want to protect yourself. You want to keep the people that is under your custody. You want to keep it professional. You want them to have due process. And so it is a constant battle of guarding your emotions, guarding your mind, and acting as professionally as you can under the circumstances.
We have been bringing teams out since October the 7th. We have met with IDF authorities, we've met with politicians, we've met with survivors, we've met people in the streets. And it has been very noticeable to us, the change in them from the first time we saw them to when we went out. When was the last time?
A few months ago.
A few months ago. To see the same person speaking to the group, and we looked at them, we thought, it's their decision, obviously, but we almost felt bad asking them to come back and speak again because they just looked thinner, more haggard, and you could see the weight that this is.
The toll it had taken on them.
Yeah, toll it had taken on them. So you mentioned about the Temple Mount.
Wait, before we go there, I have another question. Just following up on what you just said about the emotional and mental toll and all that stuff. When you're exposed to what you're exposed to, and it's so personal to you, and then you see the rest of the world initially supportive, but quickly that turned, and now there's so much anti-Israel, anti-Jewish rhetoric, denying things that happened, etc. How does that play into this as well? How does that impact you, maybe other soldiers around you, to see now the world's against you when you've just had this very personal terrorist attack? How do you protect your minds, your emotions with that scenario?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because again, the battlefield for us isn't just the terrorists that we're fighting. We're fighting a multi-front war. I think this is another thing to also point out for your listeners. A lot of the news footage and talk is mainly focused on Gaza. But on October 7th, we actually were attacked from Lebanon, attacked from Syria, attacked from Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank, attacked from the Houthis, attacked from Iran. I mean, it's like people don't, I think, understand the level of violence that has been unleashed on Israel. Not all on October 7th, but from October 7th and on. These are all the directions that we've been bombarded by. For example, Iran sent over the largest ballistic missile attack in modern history. In fact, there has never been in the history of warfare a larger aerial ballistic attack against another country in the history of humanity. Okay. That happened on one of the waves of the ballistic missile attacks that was sent towards Israel. So imagine we had, I think, over 5 waves of attack, maybe more, maybe less. I forget exactly the number. You lose count at some point. But then you have waves of ballistic attacks coming from the Houthis. You have waves of attacks coming from Lebanon and then also from Syria. And I think that's important for people to understand, that what we're up against and what we've been up against is just a grueling, non-ending wave of attack after attack after attack, including terrorist attacks in Israel from Palestinian terrorists in Israel. And then the most recent one was the bus attack, which again was a total miracle. The wave of attack that came from Iran and the Houthis and so on, by miracle, there has been very, 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 very low casualty, basically zero, from Jewish casualties. Sadly, there was a Bedouin girl that was killed, and then a Palestinian, actually from Gaza, was killed in Jericho. Those were the only casualties that I can recall and remember from these wave of ballistic attacks, like I said, and that's a complete miracle. But then in addition to the latest terrorist attack, which was planted bombs on buses and suicide bombers that were supposed to blow themselves up on the light rail systems on Friday morning, 9 a.m. in the morning. And instead, by miracle, the bombs went off. Some of the bombs went off on the buses at night because the terrorists had missed the AM PM. Either they missed it, or it was, again, another miracle, right? However you want to look at it. And that wave of attack was thwarted because now the security, the Shabak and so on, were able to look into this real quick and then avert the attack that was planned for that morning. That was of late. In addition to all of these constant life-threatening attacks, like you mentioned, we also have had to deal with the mental frustration and humiliation of the world condemning us. England, America, Norway, where I was for a week, for example, one of my breaks in between my deployments, I took a week to go and do Israel diplomacy, to discuss and share my firsthand accounts of what's happening in the war, and to point out their hypocrisy, to point out how, as an eyewitness account in your country, I am witnessing that you have terrorist advertisements supporting terrorism disguised in, oh no, we're just helping the poor Palestinians in Gaza, as if they're not getting international aid streamed in there. The last count that I've heard was about, I believe it was 4,000 or 3,000 plus calories a day per person that is going to the Gazans from all of the international aid that's coming in. And that's just the food. That's not talking about medical. That's not talking about everything else on top of that, clothes, you name it, right? Yet nobody is talking about the hostages, right? And this is why I told him, I said, you don't have to talk about the IDF. You don't have to talk about the Israeli government and what you think if they're good or bad. Let's put politics aside. Let's put the military operations aside. Why isn't there not one poster in all of Norway for the hostages? Did their voice not count? All eyes on Rafah, right? Well, how about all eyes on the hostages, innocent hostages, which, as we know now as well, later, but what we were trying to advocate and say, what about the Bibas children, 2 young boys that had been held for hundreds of days in the most horrible conditions that we were hearing from the hostages that were released. And the Israeli public was in an outcry and saying, let these boys go. Let the mom go. These are innocent. And of course, now we know, after, I think it was 500 days, we finally found out that the reason why they did not so-called release them is because there was nothing to release. Within a month of their captivity, they were brutally murdered by hand. I mean, the terrorists, we know, had physically murdered them with their own hands and mutilated them, and then also tried to hide their tracks in messing with the evidence of their inhumane, brutal murder of these young boys and the mother. So imagine and put yourself in our shoes, right? It's one thing as a Brit or an American, useful moron, okay, screaming free Palestine. Or in one of the meetings in the States where I was, they interrupted and screamed, "What about the children?" You have no clue how much anger that puts in me. I was boiling mad when I hear these people have the audacity to scream to me in my face, "What about the children?" Yeah, what about my children? What about my wife, who is 9 months pregnant, but at the time she was 8 months pregnant, came under another ballistic attack that landed in our neighbor's house, just down, not far from us. A huge ballistic missile that could have killed my wife and kids. What about our children? All you care about, and they don't really care, because what about the Arabs who are being slaughtered in Syria right now, as an example, right? So everybody is having bleeding hearts for Palestinians. Nobody cares about Arabs killing Arabs. That's okay. That to me is a mental illness. It is insane. It is humiliating. And it's infuriating for people like me. How dare you accuse me of doing horrible things when all I am doing, as any man should do, is defending his family, either my immediate family or my nation, the greater family of Israel, which includes Muslims, which includes Christians. They don't like to be called Christian Arabs, by the way, but Christians who live here. Yeah. They're not part of the Pan-Arabic community, and they've been here for centuries. The Druze, the Bedouins, the Cherkessians. This is Israel, and I'm fighting for them, and they're fighting with me in the military. Okay? So that's our reality. And for the audacity of the world to accuse us of somehow being this apartheid nation and projecting your white guilt on us, that, shove it down your own conscience. Quit projecting your junk on us is my message to those people. That's your worldview. That's your problem. If you have white guilt in North America and you have white guilt in European nations, that's not my problem. We're not white, okay? We are Middle Eastern. We are European. We are Indian. We are African. Israelis and Jews are a multi-ethnic people group. So quit assuming that we're like you, because we're not.
Yeah.
And I would add, and if you're going to continue this way, go out there and see for yourself. Go out there with a clean slate and go and have a look.
Oh, they don't care about looking for themselves.
No, but I'm just saying if if they're okay, Doran, you know, we don't believe what you're saying, then go out there, walk around the country with him and see.
Yeah, they care. They say 100%. They care about human rights. They really don't. They don't care about human rights. They hate Israel. They don't like the Jewish people. And so this is a good opportunity to attack them. But like you said, what's going on in Syria? Pick a number of countries where people have been massacred. Nothing. Yeah. Complete silence.
But I'm not silent. See, that's the thing. I actually care about human rights. I actually care about Christian rights in the world, because this is what I've been part of the advocacy that I've been working on for many years, is working in African nations, helping develop relationships with them in Israel. And this is how I got good relationships with Christians in Europe and mainly in Scandinavia, who have headed this organization called Africa Israel Initiative. And I've been a host or hosted by these African nations, speaking to government officials, speaking to religious leaders, and hearing about their suffering, hearing about how Islamic extremists are persecuting them. And so it's both me eyewitnessing as an eyewitness, seeing their suffering, seeing the floor where a grenade was tossed into the church, and then them showing me scars of shrapnel that had hit them as they were in the middle of a worship service, and having an Islamic terrorist toss a grenade into the middle of their worshiping God. I mean, this is insane. And so I've seen the suffering. I talk about it. You see, anybody who follows my social media, you see that I am screaming out, let's take action for them, not just for us. So my cause isn't just a Jewish cause. It's not my eyes are like this. I care about I care about evil in the world, and I'm going to be doing whatever I can to help combat that evil wherever it may be. And so where I can do and make a change or physically fight against evil is here in my backyard. That I'm allowed to do legally, right? But if there's a way I can help at least raise awareness, talk about, I'm not just one who puts words out there. And so I think my criticism towards these people, and like you guys were saying correctly, is a correct criticism, because these are people who are just angry. These are people who are confused. These are people who don't have purpose, in my opinion, and they get sucked into this cause without any actual skin in the game or knowing anything. They won't take a plane and or a boat ride, however you like, and come over here and see the reality on the ground. And you said correctly, ma'am, that is exactly it. Come here and look at the apartheid. Come and prove me wrong. And there are some who do that. There are some who do that. They do come here and they still will try to find an angle, and they'll try to push an agenda. But hey, at least they came here. At least they made an effort. And I at least give them that credit, even when they try to still spin things around and turn it, the truth on its head. But yeah, I mean, how can you fight for a cause and not even have seen the place that you're talking about, have actual knowledge of the history, the geography, from the river to the sea? What river, what sea? You guys have seen these videos where they're asked that question and they don't have a clue.
No.
Not a clue, right?
Apparently someone in London was asked that just the other day, and they said, I don't know, I think it's the River Thames. I was like, yeah, that about sums it up.
I was just going to say, and they don't even know their own geography. And you just, so exactly. Israelis know more about your geography, right, of the world, of people who are criticizing us. And that's the irony, right? Any case. Yeah.
Well, to go back to my question now, which I'm really, really interested in, you have one of your many focuses, or say passions, the Temple Mount. And we know, well, people may not realize, but what they were calling they didn't call it, we're going to have an October the 7th invasion. They called it the Alaska flood. They were going to flood down and they were going to go to the Alaska Mosque, which is sitting on, dare I say it, the Temple Mount. Can you say to us why do you take time out for this tiny little, hardly looks a mount. It looks like a little hill. Why have you made that a focus? And talk to us a bit about why it's important, whatever you have to say.
Mm-hmm. Well, in 2014, I helped launch an organization called Cry for Zion. And the reason why we started Cry for Zion is because we noticed, myself and my Christian relations partner, John Anderson, as for years we've been discussing these issues, discussing Jewish Christian relations and so on, and different topics. But this was an area that I felt that I was ignorant in. And I thought, okay, I know as a Jew why it's important to me, but why is it important to Christianity? Should it be important to Christianity? And as we were asking these questions and looking into them, the answers that we arrived to were very surprising. That not just was this an issue of importance to the early church in Jerusalem, but it was the main subject, the main core of the early church movement, which could be summarized as a Temple Mount sect, right? They prayed daily in the temple. They met daily in the temple. They taught daily in the temple. We know that they would typically congregate at Solomon's portico in the temple court area. So we also know the location where the early church met, taught, etc., prayed. So they were a part of the Jewish worship on the Temple Mount. And Jesus, right? The only time that Jesus acted unchristlike, if you like,
Yeah.
right, was on the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
You know, and this was always something that kind of drew my attention. Is why does he lose it? Like, why is this such a touchy subject? Apparently, right? Because he had many conversations, many conflicts that he was constantly dealing with. But this was the one where he actually kind of just goes to town, so to speak, and, gets out a whip and like gets violent. And you're like, that's not the Christ that most Christians kind of, imagine in their mind, right? Like Jesus wouldn't do that. It's like, well, he did. and so when we examine that passage in the New Testament, we noticed that the phrase that Jesus says, he says, don't you know that my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, right? Is the full quote, if you like, from the prophets. And so the assumption that the conclusion we came to is it must have been in the court of the Gentiles where Jesus was making this powerful statement. And what he was essentially doing, he wasn't critiquing the money changers because they were greedy Jews. This is a classic Christian slant on the New Testament, and a lot of statements that are taken out of context. And I think this is one of them. It wasn't about the money changers because you had to have the money changers to exchange your normal money to temple currency. You had to be able to purchase your sacrifices, right? People aren't going to give you a dove or a lamb or a goat or what have you for free. It doesn't work like that. Farmers had to raise the animals. The priests had to examine them, that they were kosher for the sacrifice at the temple. There was a full process. So it wasn't any kind of corruption per se happening, although there might have been a certain level of corruption in there as well. But based on what I was examining from that passage, it was actually that it seems to me, because Jesus says, don't you know this is a house of prayer for all nations? In other words, the emphasis is on the Gentiles. It's not on the obvious, which is where the Jews had the court of the men, the women, and all the different separations where the priests could go, and all the different levels of separation because of temple worship, right? So there needs to be the separation, which I know in a lot of church history, they like to teach about the wall of separation being removed and so on. But when it comes to worshiping in the temple, you have to have, for sanctity's sake, you have to have levels of separation, because this is what God commanded, not man. Man didn't put up these separation walls. It was actually God who commanded Israel through Moses and the priesthood and so on. And so when you know that, and you have more of a Jewish understanding of the New Testament, and you re-examine this passage of Scripture, then to me, you can glean more out of it than what meets the eye, which is what most Christians have seen for centuries. And that to me was a revolutionary idea to help share with my Christian audience around the world and say, hey, Jesus was fighting for you Gentiles, you God-fearers, from the dispersion of the Gentiles around the world, the non-Jews. And then the other thing I would say is that every Jewish movement today that is petitioning for a third temple, that is petitioning to restore prayer on the Temple Mount for Jews, the slogan is a house of prayer for all nations. And I've had this conversation with religious Jews, with Orthodox rabbis and so on. And I asked them, I said, so have you noticed that there hasn't been any time in history where the Temple Mount was actually accessible by the nations to the level where that passage of scripture was actually fulfilled, either in the first or second temple period. And they said, you're right. There hasn't, it hasn't really been a focus. And we never, saw the need to, historically, right? Because in years past, from the second and first temple period and back, there was Israel, who worshiped the one God, and we were separate from all of the idolatrous nations of the world, all the way past the destruction of the temple. But it's through the Christian church that spread the gospel of the belief in the one God, that added themselves to that one God belief system. And as you know, they were heavily persecuted by the Roman Empire and so on and so forth, right? And so essentially, this is the first time in history where you actually have monotheistic belief system within the Gentile world, the non-Jewish world, where the way I see it is this passage of scripture can come to fruition, where essentially the Christians would fit into that category of being able to have access to the Temple Mount, to the court of the Gentiles, and be able to worship the God of Israel. And so in seeing all of that, I thought, okay, so I have to make this accessible to the Christian world, because I know that a lot of the Christian world looks at the temple as something negative. There's the temple of Antichrist. There's all of this negativity about wars and this and that. And so it's like Christians kind of want to stay away from that. They just want to skip forward to the rapture and the end. Let's not worry ourselves, with all wars or like that's not for us. We just, rapture out of here. Right now, again, I'm of course, belittling, and oversimplifying, as you know, but essentially that's kind of more or less, I would say, in the back of most Christians' minds. If you talk about the temple, they don't really bother themselves too much with the details. Right. And so that's been my mission, is to help educate you on that. And I would say another revolutionary idea that I've noticed, it's unsettling for a lot of Christian pastors, for example, and I understand them, because essentially it's changing your theology radically. And the ramifications, if I accept what you just told me, Doron, this is going to affect my whole church or my whole denomination. And so, I see them wrestle with this. And I tell them, I say, listen, Christians by the millions have streamed to the upper room in Jerusalem. Okay. And you guys, you visit Israel and you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I imagine you've been to the upper room.
Yeah.
And
what's meant to be the upper room.
What is representative of it.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And listen, I did the tour guide course back during COVID. Because for years, people have been telling me, you have to do the tour guide course. We really like your explanations on the biblical, real historic places, not the classic Christian or Jewish sites, just because that's what people say. And so I was like, okay, I'll do the tour guide course. I'll try to get my license to guide and so on. So in any case, so I've also done the tour guide course. So I know also why the Ministry of Tourism essentially leads and misleads technically millions of Christians around the world to all these sites, because the Jewish people or the nation of Israel aren't in the business of writing your theology, right? We're not here to correct you. It's none of our business is basically the outlook. I'm the guy who doesn't care about your theology per se. I care about his history and facts, and I will dig to the bottom of an issue and get to the root source of it, both for my own edification, my own knowledge, and if people do want to ask and do want to have extracurricular information, if you like, and I usually ask them, I say, do you want to know what your denomination teaches, or do you want to know what I understand and what I've researched and what I understand to be the actual historic fact? And I see them wrestling with, like,
Just tell us what we want to hear.
Yeah.
I just want to say, Doran, in this
Yes.
pause moment.
Yes.
You just bring up Israel and it messes with people's theology. Never mind when you go, when you then head to the Temple Mount. I mean, just
Correct.
so, once you start dipping into Israel, you might as well go the whole way.
Exactly. And you're right. And so again, most of the people that I guide are evangelicals, right? So I don't guide because again, I don't have a license yet, but I will join the tour and I come in as a special guest. Yeah, on one of these locations, and then I'll just give the insider's account versus the tour guide version. and then one of the points that I like to point out, and I know this blows a lot of evangelicals' minds or non-evangelicals as well, is that the upper room outpouring of the Holy Spirit did not happen in the upper room. When you read Acts chapter 1 and you read Acts chapter 2, those are two separate locations, but the readers who are reading the New Testament don't have a Jewish perspective and understanding, and you miss the obvious. So all I'd done, being the bad guy, is throwing a wrench into your theology, is actually interpret that passage of the New Testament for you and say, look, Acts chapter 1, yes, they're in an upper room somewhere in Jerusalem. We don't know where. I can tell you it's not at what they call it Zion Gate over there, or Zion, Mount Zion, because that's also not Mount Zion. That's also a misnomer, by the way, and by the Crusaders. Any case, but what happens is there's a building that's built there in the 4th century. And I know this for a fact because like I said, I like to get to the bottom of things. And the people who are custodians of that site, they actually took a drilling, like a diamond drill, and they drilled out from the foundation stones of the building that everything stands on, where you have David's tomb, also not correct, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You have the so-called David's tomb, which it's possible it might be David's bones that were buried on a second burial, because we know he's buried in the tomb of the kings in the city of David. That we know. And we've located that archaeologically today. But in any case, so in my opinion, it's not David's tomb. If you follow scripture, if you follow archaeology, it's not a structure that was built during the time of Jesus. So we know that's not where this upper room was, but somewhere there was an upper room where they gathered, 120 of them. And then Acts chapter 2 is the transitional point in the story. It says, and now they were all gathered at the place. Hamakom in scripture is a Hebrew term that's used for the first time during the binding of Isaac. It says that on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he's on the southern mountain ridge overlooking Jerusalem. And what he sees is Hamakom. And from this point on in scripture, the Hebrew term is used almost every time it says Hamakom. It's talking about the Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah, if you like, which is where Abraham then takes his son to sacrifice him. And this becomes the place where the future temples are built. This is the exact same place where the disciples were gathered at the hour of prayer, as it says, during the feast of Shavuot. You guys call it Pentecost. It's the 50th day of the counting of the Omer, which leads to the celebration of Shavuot, which any religious Jew in Jerusalem during the hour of prayer, where's he going to be found? At the Temple Mount, worshiping with all of Israel. And the phenomenon that takes place there happens 1-to-1 with the giving of the Torah. And this is, again, you have to get into Jewish oral law and oral tradition to even see this. But in the oral tradition, it says that when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, it says that there was tongues of fire on the heads of the Israelites, and that the Torah went out in all the 70 languages of the spoken languages of the world. But only Israel received the Torah, because only Israel was there to hear the giving of the Torah, if you like, from God, right? And so then we know in Jewish tradition that it was our responsibility to take that Torah and transmit it to the rest of the world. And then if you parallel that story in Jewish tradition, in Jewish history, and you parallel it with Acts chapter 2, it's a repeat of history, if you like. And obviously for the disciples, this became a big deal. And that's why Christians around the world, of course, come to the upper room, because to you, it's a big deal. The only problem is you're going to the wrong place. You're not going to the Temple Mount, which is where this big happening happened. The location was on the Temple Mount, where it says 3,000 people joined this movement after hearing Peter's speech. How could that happen in the narrow streets of Jerusalem? It's impossible. So that's what I do. Is I'm the bad guy. Like I said, I throw a wrench into the system, and all I'm doing is I'm highlighting what should be highlighted to you, which should be of importance to you. But it's lost in translation, and that's why many Christians have missed this location. All I'm trying to do is restore the importance of this place to you, and then also join together in the battle for there to be pure, forbidden worship on the Temple Mount, which right now the reality is Jews and Christians cannot pray on the Temple Mount. Only Muslims can pray on the Temple Mount.
Well, first of all, we love people who personally, and as a ministry, who throw wrenches. We love having, because we always think if you can't throw everything you believe up in the air, then you're holding on to it. And if you throw it in the air, the things that are truth will settle down again, the rest will go. So we love it.
But historically, we've like people that have done that with us. They said, hey, let me tell you something. Might be uncomfortable. We're like, hey, we like this. Throw it out there. Let's see what happens.
Right. So, which is Protestantism, right? I mean, that essentially should be a easy thing for Protestants to accept, right? Because that's what Protestantism was. It was to protest against the Catholic Church, saying, we don't prescribe to all of your ideas. We want to read the Bible for and interpret for what it says and live that out, right? So it should be even easier if you come from a Protestant background, of course.
So one of the things we did, and I don't want to be sidetracked onto this, but I'll just mention it, is we took our people who went out to help to see the red heifers, which
Shiloh,
which I think the Muslims or whoever know the significance of that more than the church does. We say we went to see some red heifers. They say, you went to see some red cows? Yeah, we've got pictures of the red cows. So I'll just throw that, but I don't want to go too far. Maybe another time we can.
But that also links into the attack, because Hamas said that Israel having the red heifers was also a spark for the attack.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think they're more
correct.
But so
correct.
We, I think we're going to have you back, Doran. But let's get this somewhere where we can at least think about concluding. So we, you, us, we need to be able to get up that Temple Mount, and we need to be able to worship up there, as biblically we agree God ordained for us from the time the temple was built. What are we to do about it? What are you doing about it? I mean, do we just sit back and say, yes, we need to go up there? Or what does proactivity do? I mean, we take our groups to the Temple Institute and things like that. But what do we do besides praying to move this forward?
And to add to that, we agree the Temple Mount is hugely significant for a lot of the reasons that you've already said. On one of our trips, we were serving IDF soldiers, and I was talking to a rabbi.
Oh, yeah.
And the rabbi said to me, why do you think this war is happening? So I said, why do I ultimately think it's happening? And he said, yes. And I said, ultimately, this is a fight for the throne of David in Jerusalem. And his eyes filled with tears. And he said, I can't speak anymore. And he walked off. We did talk again later. I didn't intend for that to shut down the conversation. But, the Temple Mount is hugely significant in everything which is going on. Anyway.
So
that's exactly it. Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah. So that's exactly, again, why we started Cry for Zion, was to both educate. And as I just did now, I gave you some pointers. You can go onto our website and read about the Temple of Antichrist. What about the sacrifices? We have good theological Christian theological articles on that, discussing these issues. And so it's education, but then there's action. And the action that Christians can do and take for this issue is they can go to our website, cryforzion.com, and go to the petition and sign the petition, which is directed to the Prime Minister, Mayor of Jerusalem, basically the authorities of Israel, and it's petitioning them to fight for the cause of the Christian world, petitioning for Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. And it's specifically focused and worded in that way because if Jews are allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, it literally will mean that everyone else will have the access to pray on the Temple Mount exactly like you have at the Western Wall. Any of you who've ever been to Israel and have ever visited the holiest, how would you say, the holiest substitute place for the Jewish people, because it's the substitute that we can't get up on the Temple Mount. So we go as far as we can to the place where we should be praying, which is the retaining wall of the Temple Mount, known as the Western Wall, or the Kotel in Hebrew. And so if you notice, this being so holy to us, anybody can access this place. Anyone can join along with the Jewish people and they can pray freely. I've seen people next to me from Africa praying in tongues and going at it, the way they know how to do. And nobody's going, hey, you can't do that, First of all, most Jews don't even know what it is that they're doing.
The visual aspect in my head here is really funny.
Correct, right? But for any charismatics, then to you know what it is. But to us, we're like, I don't know. He's praying in his language, right? But the point is, to kind of give you this understanding, we don't prohibit people from worshiping God the way they know how, right? So as long as you do it respectfully and honorably, hey, you're going to be welcome to the house of God. And so by petitioning for Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, you're actually petitioning for your right to pray on the Temple Mount. And that's why it's worded that way on purpose. And so that's the petition. You can support the cause by donating to Cry for Zion. You can help support our cause so that we can fund the movement, the education, the work, the programming. People can go and help support the film project that we're now releasing by God's grace for Jerusalem Day, May 25th. The goal is to release our I Am Israel, the Mountain of the King film, like I said, which is a cinematic film, a Hollywood level. We have John Rhys Davies as the narrator. So anybody who knows Lord of the Rings or people that are older that know the Indiana Jones series, they'll know John Rhys Davies as a very accomplished movie actor and has a wonderful British accent.
I didn't realize that people that are familiar with Indiana Jones, you said, right?
Yes.
I'm now
yes.
old. I'm old.
That's why I have
Just
to say that because when I tell people like, oh, you know that, because I don't know him from Lord of the Rings, but the younger generations are like, oh yeah, I forget the guy's his name, but they know him as the little guy with the beard and the axe. I know him as the guy who's with Harrison Ford, and so our mission was really to highlight the Temple Mount in a beautiful cinematic way. And so that's another way that you can empower us, because think about it this way. You have, what is it? No Other Land or whatever it is, that film, documentary, propaganda film, anti-Israel film, unfortunately. In fact, in this past year, I've just done some research on this. In this past year, you have a whole sleuth from 2003 to 2005, like a whole genre of films that are pushing this agenda that Israel's an occupying nation and the poor Palestinians. And so so what I'm saying is there's a propaganda war against Israel. And what you can do to help us fight in this war is fund the film. Because if you fund the I Am Israel film, which you can find on my website at dorankeidar.com, and I think we also have it on Cry for Zion. So either one of those websites, you'll find a link to the film, and you can help support the soundtrack, because that's the last part of the process. The film is already cut. We have John Rhys Davies that's done all of his narration. Everything's ready except for the music, which is a very expensive part of the project, because we have to pay for a I can't speak. An orchestra in Tennessee that is creating a beautiful cinematic soundtrack for our film. And so that's the last piece of the funding that will help get this film in the viewership of people around the world. And of course, to share the film, to get to approach us about how to do a public viewing of the film and get this into cinemas, in your local cinema. I don't know how that works, but my goal and my hope is that this is a film that will be also petitioned to the Oscar Awards, not because we want to win an Oscar for the Oscar's sake, but it's to to be an ambassador for Israel on the world platform in a beautiful, godly, positive film. There's no negativity in the film. Anybody who watches it, you'll know what I'm talking about. We focused on the most sacred thing on this earth in the way God views it, and cut through all of the war and all of the nasties. And one day I'll actually even do a discussion about some of the scenes that we filmed and how we were able to accomplish certain cuts when actually it was in the middle of conflict, actually. And so I'll also discuss that with folks and make that available for people.
Because one other way I would add is go up there. Because
thank you. Sorry. Yes. And that's one of our things as well. Thank you.
That's
is
right.
Encouraging Christians. Thank you. That I totally forgot that, is to encourage Christians to go up and visit the Mount, as many as possible, because the more Christians visit the site, the more the world will recognize that this is not just an Islamic site, but it's holy and important to Christians and Jews. And you have the freedom to go up there. Jews are prohibited by the numbers that they're allowed to go up, and a lot of prohibitions that make it very difficult for us in droves to go up there. But you actually a whole tour group can go up there just like that.
Yeah, but we've been up there, and we have seen that when Jewish people are up there, you've actually got the IDF protecting them and walking around with them. So, yeah, I would say get up there, go there. And I think very few groups do, because they don't realize they can. So do this.
Well, it's logistically a problem. So now the tour guide will explain to you the tour guide's dilemma. So the tour guides know that they're limited to X amount of days of a tour. And this is my mission that's been given to me, to show you all of these sites per the request of the tour leader or what have you. And when it comes to the Temple Mount, that's usually not requested. And if it is requested, it puts the tour guide in a position of logistic acrobatics, right? To get the tour group during the exact specific hours, which is either early in the morning or in the mid afternoon, which is normally during your lunch hour. So it's like, do I sacrifice the lunch hour time with my group in the Old City? Do I get them really, really early to up on the Temple Mount? But then how do I tie in if it's, let's say, the Holocaust Museum or the Jerusalem Museum or other sites in the Old City that I want to show them, right? So this is usually just so people understand that that's the problem logistically and practically for these guys.
No.
So you have to fight and tell them, I want this to be a highlight on the tour, plain and simple. Make it happen.
I don't think it's a logistical problem. I think it's a priority problem.
That's what I'm saying. You make it a priority because you're the customer. So you tell the tour guide what you want, and they will make it a priority for them because you're the client. You're the one who's requesting that.
We have never had a group, and like I say, we take our groups up there, that we've said you've got to be down there for 7:30 in the morning. We've never had one person complain.
Look, you don't go to Israel to sleep. That shouldn't be.
No, that's not kind of what we do.
That's an expensive sleep if that's what you're wanting to do.
There's so much more, Doran. I'd like to ask you about this, and maybe we can have you back again and go into other angles that I'm sitting here thinking I would love to ask. But I think you have, I hope, caused people to think, inspired them, and hopefully even made them curious that they want to find out. And all the links will be at the bottom, won't they?
Yeah, I'll put all the links in the description box. So if you're listening or watching wherever you are, they're there ready for you to go and check out, see what he's doing, check out the various sites, check out the podcast. Doran, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.